Welcome to Baseball Biz on Deck, and I'm Mark Carpenter, your host, and with me today, I have Dr. Julie Wernick. And Julie has been into the business for some time as an athlete, and then 20 years as a clinical psychologist in sports. And I'm sure she has a lifetime of stories to tell as that, plus being a parent. So you put all those together, and there's a lot of life experience. So,
yes.
Julie, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me. I'm super excited to talk baseball and sports and mental health.
I'm glad to have you here. I got to meet you at the PodFest, and then, of course, listening to your own podcast with Gettin Gritty with Dr. J, which I love. I mean, you cover a lot of different topics. You have different guests, and whether it be some player who's been in the past, or one of them like on recently you had about bad coaching. And I think as a parent, as a fan, and myself, I've always been amazed about what coaches can do.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, and I look back to years ago when I was a youngster and I watched the University of Louisville basketball, and I heard that they brought on this guy, this psychologist who helped with their mental health, and suddenly seen a certain positivity of these players being able to hit more free throws. And I said, somebody's doing something. I figured it must have been some kind of magic, but we're talking 40 years ago, so forgive me. I had no understanding.
Yes, we are magical as sports psychologists.
You must be. I mean, to see the turnaround that you guys are able to deliver with the work that you do is amazing to me. I mean, you're able to listen, hear, and give guidance that's proven well. And while we're talking baseball, I know, what was it? One of the folks you work with, was it Eric Homa? He posted something the other day about having a challenge, but he had a plan to face it. And it sounded like that was something that maybe you had worked with him on.
Well, I think with my athletes, even my collegiate athletes, I work with a lot of college, because in San Antonio, we have a lot of diverse universities here. And I work with a lot of pitchers. Pitchers and hitters are my special. It's almost like the quarterback and the kicker. It's if you're not hitting, you're not going to win. And if you're not pitching well, you're not going to win. But it's so interesting that even though a lot of pitchers, even at the Division I level, they don't even have really solid routines. They don't really know what to do prior to the pitch. They don't really know what to say to themselves. They don't have a routine after a pitch. And even in the warm up, like I said, oh my gosh, the key to consistent success is doing the same thing all the time. And what's kind of funny, and I'll bring this up, is I had one pitcher and he goes to play, I think it's Ole Miss or school in Mississippi. And he's in a bullpen and he's warming up. And about an 80-year-old man comes up to the bullpen, of course, the opposing team's fans, and start talking about his mother and just ripping him. I mean, this is a warm up. This is a 20-year-old, boy pitching. And these fans are totally just ripping this guy apart. And this is the common theme. So there's a lot of problems. Number one, I think our fans are taking a little too serious, but and going after this poor innocent kid. That's a problem in of itself. To be able to do that, get a life, okay, have fun, support your team. But do we really need to bully these poor guys who are just trying to play baseball? And the second is, these guys have to know how to handle it. And you have to be able to handle distractions. And that's not easy, because you're there, you're warming up, and then you have that. So you do have to block out a lot in order to pitch well. There are a lot of distractions, and by having a very specific routine and really locking in is really important. And so as a sports psychologist, he had no idea. Number one, I think people don't know what to expect when they walk in. They who is this person and what can they offer me? So I think they have no clue sometimes all the tools that we have. Second, I played high level, so I think, they get it really fast, but they have so much to learn. And even the professional athletes, for hitting, in the books I recommend, I recommend all my athletes do some reading, because it can get a lot more detailed in our sessions. I say, what is your favorite pitch to hit? And some of them don't even know, even at the higher level, what their specific favorite pitch is. I say, oh, inside. So there's a lot to be learned, and the details are everything in sports. And so the sports, we are able to really get into the nitty gritty of what are they thinking about? What are they feeling? Knowing themselves really well. So it's pretty special, my work, and I really enjoy it.
Well, it's amazing to me when I'm looking at what you're doing, especially when I think about pitchers and watching them on the mound. And you see a lot of them do have a routine. There's certain steps they take. There's a certain approach they take. how they position themselves, even with their glove while they're standing on the rubber long before they actually take that pitch. And I think that a lot of times they must have to try to filter out all of that crowd noise, everything else surrounding them, and just
Mhm.
what is that grip on their, on that ball that they have on their hand?
Right.
What is their relationship with that catcher and being able to get the signal and send it back and being just in that moment, and
Right.
not overthinking it. I mean,
Right.
what kind of guidance can you give to someone when they've
Right.
got all of those things swirling around in their head?
Right. So I think the number one thing is that the more anxious you are and the more you think, the more inward you are. And to be a great pitcher is pretty simple. It's trusting your pitch and focusing on the target. So, I call it 4 F's. It's really having fun, because I think number one, when you're really enjoying pitching and you enjoying anything, it just takes some of the stress off and you're like, oh my God, bring it, you're embracing the challenge. Number two, really believing in your pitch. And so you have to really, really, the warm up, really get that confidence. But then again, your warm up doesn't, I always tell the athletes that your warm up doesn't have to mean anything, because there are many times when I've had, I was warming up. I played middle infield in college and my warm-ups were kind of fair, but warm-ups are really not adrenaline. It's not really a warm-up is a warm-up. So number one, you definitely want to realize that just because you're warm up in the bullpen doesn't mean your pitches are not going to work. So you really have to believe in your stuff. Number three, you really have to focus really hard on your target. And having just a couple of keywords, maybe just a couple things that you think about versus having too many things, and
Right.
then really following through. So I think if you keep the premise of confidence, fun, focus, and follow through, and then for that athlete, it may just be 1 or 2 words, keywords, and that's the way to kind of just keeping things a little simple in their mind.
Simplicity seems to be the key then, and like you
Mhm.
said, focus. So that is interesting, and I would think that would be sometimes very difficult to get to. I know my whole life, whatever I'm working with,
Mhm.
staying focused seems
Right.
like a real challenge.
Sure, there's a lot of obstacles. For example, I had a pitcher, Division 1 pitcher. He gets drafted to the major, and he's in the minors. And when I was working him, he didn't really have any major injuries. But then all of a sudden, you're playing a million games. Oh my gosh, the seasons for college. And then when you get drafted, it's literally weeks. You have to go get your blood work done, your physical, and then you're playing single A. And sometimes if they get an arm injury, then the challenge then is, oh my gosh, like I'm here, my velocity is 10 miles per hour down, and now they start panicking. So they feel there's a lot of pressure on them because they're not getting paid a whole lot. And then they like start freaking out. So some of the agents are starting to come to me as well, and they sign their baseball players because they say, oh, the mental is 80%. No, it's 100%, because your brain is constantly there, your mind, your feelings, your thoughts are constantly with you. So it's 100% mental. If you ask a lot of athletes who don't make it, they don't say it's usually technical. They'll say it's the mental game. So I feel like it should be that all baseball players have someone just like strength training and nutrition. Of course, it gets to the point, well, who's paying for it? But I feel like that's the issue that we find in sports psychology still, is that we're very underutilized, even though as you get older and your technique is there. Obviously, it's not as much technical. When you're younger, you're trying to throw the ball, it becomes a little more technical. But as you get older and more experienced, it does become more mental than even physical.
Yeah, and I'm sure the level of confidence over time has to really kind of explode as far as what they're able to achieve. I mean, we look at some of these pitchers that are out there now, DeGrom, Verlander, et cetera, and these are seasoned players. And a lot of times these folks have gone through injuries, just like you were talking about. Tommy John, years ago, you said, oh, that's a career ender. It's over with. But now I'm seeing pitchers who've had 2 Tommy Johns and who are still performing well out there. So
Right. Right.
I mean, it gets past a certain mindset, I guess, from
Mhm.
from what we've had in the past, and that's quite the challenge. Well,
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear that they're somewhat more embracing, at least the agents, of how to cultivate a player with some guidance from a doctor like yourself.
Yeah. I mean, that's why people ask me, well, what made you do a podcast? And I said, because me just helping the few people, number one, there's a cost involved for my services, right? But a podcast, I can reach the whole world. And the other thing is I'm giving advice too and tips that, people may not get necessarily in my office because, let's say a minor league baseball player that can't afford it, they're getting paid very minimal. I think a podcast, I'm probably going to eventually do like the mental performance of pitchers, right? And I'll probably get high-end, pitchers coming in and really talking and being about their mental game. But number one, they can't be ashamed because they have to share their experience with others. And that's the problem. People will go on and talk about their physical rehab, but a lot of them are afraid to say, oh yeah, I work with a sports psychologist. So I think that's the problem right there is how do we get us for athletes to say, and I've been in San Antonio for many years and not hardly any coaches seek me out. The players who find me are the players and the parents. And this is the problem. Why aren't more coaches utilizing and saying, yeah, like, let's bring on Dr. J, or how about, you know what? Just interview me, like interview and get to know me and know my knowledge before you hire, and then say, wow. But that's, even in our country, there's a shortage because we're all wanting to help, but we don't get the opportunities to help.
Well, that's got to be a critical piece of the puzzle. And it's a bit worrisome. It's like, you have to realize these things are actually happening. I'm glad parents are there. I'm glad agents are there, because if there's a level of concern, and it still amazes me because as you're saying, the game is 100% mental, and certainly for those pitchers. And that has to be acknowledged by managers. They're there in the dugout with these players. They're getting it. As long as we're kind of talking about pitchers, I'd like to jump for a moment because you were saying something about hitters. And my gosh, the sensitivity to this. I mean, some of my favorite players, they're out there and they're banging it and they're doing a great 100. They're hitting 300 and more. And then suddenly it drops down. They're lucky to get 200 or just slightly below it. And you hear of, quote, the yips, unquote, and something's happened to them. They've lost something. What do you work with athletes who are going through something like that
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think about, Altuve when the Astros, being in Texas here, and what I love to watch, I always tell my boys, always watch the best of the best, and really listen to their, of course they're 14, 15 and they're going to do what they want to do. But I especially like to listen to the best athletes in the world because they're giving you the secrets to their success. They're giving you the answers, right? And so like everyone, we should be emulating and modeling the best, whether it's physically or mentally. And, I remember Altuve was, I don't even like the word struggling, because that's when you say good or bad or struggle, now you're putting a judgment, you're doing judgment. In baseball, there's no room for that because you can go 1 for 10 and 8 for 8. It's in the matter of like overnight. You have to stay the course. And that's the problem is, people say, they want to change things, and you don't. You do the same. If you have the same routine, whether you're in the hole and you're on deck and you're stepping the box, right? And you have a lot of confidence, you make your adjustments. You may make, do a little bit of an adjustment. Okay. But not change everything. Right. But you still have to walk in that box with the same, like, I'm going to rip it. The same, like, we got this. I own you. That confidence has to be there all the time. And even if your confidence is there all the time, you can still go 0 for 8. So when Altuve said he was one for, 15.
Yeah.
But then he says, that's baseball, that's baseball. And then you, because, you don't have, it's not a struggle, it's reality. I mean, but you don't change anything. You just keep going, grinding out, and you stay confident. You keep working, you keep practicing, but then you don't press. You don't go in the box going, I have to get a hit, or I need to get a hit. And then all of a sudden he hits the game winner to win the whole thing, the World Series, or, the game ending hit. Or Kobe Bryant says, I remember I cut this out of the newspaper, which was extremely important and eye-opening. He says, 0 for 15 hits game winner. So he didn't even get a shot the whole game, and he hits the game winner. That's a champion right there.
Oh, yeah.
Because when it counted, they did it. So Altuve is saying, stay the course. Like, don't freak out. Don't panic. Don't change everything. And that's the problem in golf. And especially in golf, everyone starts changing things. It's like, don't change anything. Just keep doing what you're doing. It'll work.
Well, and you hit it right there. I mean, as far as continuity and doing it, and staying, kind of jumping for a moment, I think it was Joe Madden. I was reading one of his books, And one thing he was talking about, because he came up like most of them, come up as a hitting coach, et cetera, before they ever long before they become a manager. And then by the time he became a manager in one of the minor leagues, he was watching his own hitting coach giving this batter who had a fantastic style, who was doing really well. He was giving instruction to that batter on how to bat. And Joe's over scratching his head saying, what? Wait a minute, come here. Leave that kid alone.
Leave it alone. Right. And that's okay. So that brings up a good point is when I'm working with a hitter and they're going in the minor league system, they call me because they're pissed off because they're all trying to, the ego of the coach, they're trying to make these players like them. And you look at Jeff Bagwell's stands, you look at Derek Jeter's stands, you look at Gary Sheffield, you look at Tony Gwynn. There's no Tony Gwynn, there's no Gary Sheffield. It's just Gary Sheffield, there's Tony Gwynn. That's it. They're individual people. And so great coaches can extract the best from that player's eyes. If they get the ball, in the hole and they're hitting well, why change it? Look at shooters like Sean Marion, and they all have different shots. So I think that's the issue too, is everyone's trying to change and they want people to be like them instead of just letting them get on base. Who cares how they got on base? I mean, still work with your craft, but let people be who they are a little bit.
If they've got talent and it's already in place, why would you modify? Like you were saying earlier, little bitty tweaks or something if you need to. But if you got the process in there and they've got it already working, you don't really need to mess with it. And the egos need to stay in the pocket for some of these coaches. But
another one that I find out, I work with like a lot of college guys, is the idea of the OPS and long ball. And I had a guy, and I was trained to be a level swing. Like my dad, grew up with Mickey Mantle and that one. He always say, Julie, level swing, level swing, level swing, level swing. So I used to have it on my batting glove, C ball, level swing, very simple. And then I had a guy go to community college and we got him to the point where he was super confident and just ripping, huge dude, 6'4" lefty. And the coach is like, no, we need more of an uppercut. You're not going to make it unless you hit the ball over the fence, not these little doubles here. And I'm like thinking, what is wrong? Like the guy is in the zone. He's hitting over 300. He's lacing the ball low. Why are we all of a sudden now have the launch angle? And it messed with him, so, and I was raised small ball all the way, like find a way to get the run in. Right. So, now everything is crazy. My dad, we were in South Florida and it was spring training because, South Florida is the Mecca in Arizona. And they did the shift. And I'm with my parents and my dad and I are like old school baseball, like, hit it where they're not. And of course there's a huge shift and my dad's pissed. He's like, just punt it down the line, just get on base. So I think that's part of it now. Is the game of baseball to me is bigger is better. And I don't believe that. I always tell, find a way to get on. And so even when I work with the younger kids, everyone wants long ball. And I'm like, now you're also putting more pressure on the hitter.
Oh gosh, come on, boys and girls. I just want to scratch my head.
Right?
I gotta tell you, Dr. J, I'm looking at some of that. And I will take somebody who gets on base and bats RBI any day of the week. Home runs, they're fun. Okay, they are fun. There's no doubt about it. But okay, one of my favorite players. I'm Tampa Bay fan. Not no surprise there. But Yandy Diaz. I love watching this man at bat because he goes up there and there's no telling what he's going to do. He's measuring each pitch as it comes in. He's got a sense of where that box is for the strike zone. And he strikes out rarely. Most time he's either walking or he gets a hit. And exactly. He's a man who sees beyond that, but he adapts to what's coming up there. And I can't imagine anybody going to Yandy and say, Yandy, you need to hit more out of the park. You got the strength to do it, but you need to hit more out of the park. I'm sorry, did he get on base last time because the pitcher was just not hitting the zone? Thank you, Yandy. And did the guy advance from first to second when Yandy did that? Thank you, Yandy. Now, there are coaches out there, like you said, who will argue with this, and certainly more at a minor league level. And that takes me to another topic, because recently you did a podcast where you were talking about bad coaching. Oh, oh boy. Yeah,
Right.
I think we've all known them. Even as an athlete, I'm sure
Mhm.
there were people you're going along the way say, good Lord, I've
Yeah.
got to find my own mindset with this.
Right.
And one quick story for me in Little League, there was this team that did so great. There was like, one of these places where you got all the big parades and 20 or 30 teams. And this one coach, he had such a great results each year, but he also stood up and screamed and shouted at each one of those players, and they'd go home crying, and
Mhm.
I don't know how he had any kind of success, but I always felt for those players. And I thought,
Yeah.
what can we expect of a coach? What does a good
Mhm.
coach bring, certainly at a level like that?
Well, I mean, the under age of 12, the dropout rate for Little League Baseball, 80% dropout because of poor coaches under the age of 12. And that's research based, that's evidence based. So obviously, we're failing the Little League Baseball players. I think what happens is, parents get overly attached to winning in their ego. And so whenever you coach out of like too much emotion, that's an issue right there. Okay. Because yelling, first of all, it's kind of common sense that you perform better when you're not having a lot of pressure on you. And so if a coach is yelling at you like, come on, you got to get a hit, that's not necessarily the best approach, but you hear it all the time. So I think we perform better when we know our coaches really believe in us. And I think it's very common sense. Like when you think common sense, positivity, relaxation, trust breeds great performance. But the coaches actually do the opposite of that. And the problem too is because right now, especially like at the high school or college or professional level, everybody's there taking your spot. And that can cause a little bit of an issue because then if you're not performing, someone else is there to take your spot. But I think great coaches understand that you're going to make physical errors. You're always going to make a physical error. Like you're always. And so that's my biggest problem is that coaches expect perfection when you're not getting it. Like in baseball, it could take a bad hop and boom, or you can hit the back of your glove. So a good coach should not even say a whole lot because the players already know what they did wrong. So negativity, pressure, that's why kids are dropping out left and right is because it's not fun. And baseball and all sports should be fun. And when you're playing for fun and you're enjoying it, great coaches can be intense. They can be like, "Come on, we got this," or "Bring it," or "Let's go." But they don't have to be abusive, and that's the difference. You can
I,
be intense but positive.
I like that because unfortunately, this particular coach, his intensity was not positive. He was the kind of guy you'd see him pointing a finger, getting in the face of the child where practically spittle was getting on him. And he was a big, imposing man on top of that. So let me ask, because you did say you got parents, you got agents, and you got players coming in. Well, are coaches themselves seeing that they need some kind of help? Are we seeing
Mhm.
coaches at all coming in and seeing yourself or others for some guidance?
Well, here's the problem too when you're getting in the collegiate world is if you don't win, you don't stay. And so athletic directors also, this is a systemic problem because parents and athletic directors and the leaders organization also have to understand the mentality of trust and building. And that takes time. But if the athletic directors too are very much like, oh, well, you're not winning, MSB, that means that you're not doing well. That's not true. You could be improving and not winning, but there's pressure for their jobs. If they're not winning, they get fired, then where do they go?
Yeah.
And so I think the coaches are projecting some of their pressures onto the kids, you know. And a lot of times even parents who do they have unresolved issues mentally. A lot of them will go, "Oh, if I only had this, I would have been this."
Yeah.
If I only had my parents or if I only had privates. And so then they're totally, and then I get the 14-year-old commits. They're 14 years old, they're already committing to D1. And then they're having so much pressure on them. And then they have all the social piece of, oh, are you really that good? And then so it's really rough across the board. But I think that coaches, a lot of kids sometimes burn out, or even in minor leagues they burn out because the coaches they're ugly or they're negative. And we all as human, you and me and everybody needs a little love. We need a little thank you. We
Oh
need a
yeah.
little appreciation. It goes a long way.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. And Dr. J, I know a boss I had years ago. He had kind of a quiet support. He would give very little guidance, and he had the best team working for him in that business. There were several other managers around. People would come to him, and they would also try to poach his employees. That's how good he was. And the one time he got critical with me, and he said, I'm disappointed. Oh my gosh, it was like a load of bricks on my back. But he got me motivated without screaming or shouting, because when he did need to give, more pointed direction, it was there. If he'd been the sort of boss where he was shouting at me all the time, telling me this, that, or other, I would have just found another job. But he
Right.
helped me with a course correction at that point.
Yeah, I mean, actions speak louder than words, like my kids have been playing with the same baseball team since they're 9, pretty much for the last 5 years. And this is the last season my coach has my twin boys, and they're 14U baseball. And our coach, he's very calm. He doesn't and I taught he was on actually the podcast, and he goes, even keel. He goes, because when you make a mistake, you got to be even keel, and
Oh
you
yeah.
play better when you're focused. So he doesn't really get on them a lot. And his actions are, he's always early to every practice. He's there early. And like you said, he's a man, he's soft spoken, but he demands commitment. He has routines. He's there early. And that shows you care just by the nature of your actions too.
Absolutely. And that is something I think we all look for, like I said, whether in coaching or in our life anywhere, just as you were saying. I want to also talk about when you're dealing with young people. And
Mhm.
like you said, the one 14 years old and they're looking for him for Division 1. It's like, good gravy, man. The
Right.
expectations.
Hmm.
I mean, I know what very little I know about psychology. I know as we age, as we grow, there's changes in our brain and how we deal with things. I can't
Right.
imagine a 14-year-old dealing with trying to
No.
even comprehend what's going on there.
No, I mean, that's why I don't think any kid should verbally commit at any age. In fact, great coaches would say wait as long as possible. I was talking to my sons for years. I love tennis, and tennis isn't as popular. I love baseball, but tennis is such an underrated sport. And my kids they played baseball and basketball, and now they're playing tennis, and now they're enjoying tennis. And, we have to make some decisions. But kids change their mind all the time. I also, and going back to youth sports, years ago when we grew up, I played 3 varsity sports in high school. We played a lot of sports. We cross trained, and I do think that pros and cons. Number one, I didn't have the technical advancements that nowadays everyone has. I mean, first of all, we didn't have the internet, so
Right.
now the internet, you can learn your swing by YouTube. You don't even have to go to a private lesson. So the problem though is that because we have so many resources, it causes more pressure, because it's almost like you got to start diapers practically, because as you get to 14, these kids have been playing club for years. And so you have to really, as a parent, balance out like overuse. So like I'm doing a little bit of like, I want my kids to play all the sports even at 14, where like some of the parents have their kids doing only baseball. And
Yeah.
I've seen 14 years old with Tommy John surgery.
Jeez, Pete. Oh my gosh, Dr. J, that's just crazy. I
Mhm.
want to stop here and remind people to the podcast you have. It's Getting Gritty with Dr. J. So you learn a lot more about this there as well. And yeah, that's something I was kind of talking to you before we got started too, is getting gritty. And you're talking about mental toughness, but
Mhm.
also being able to have some balance about the journey of life. Not, sometimes I think of people who of tough guys that I knew that they're just
Mhm.
putting up this wall and like, this is how I'm going to be, and I'm going to handle it like this. And I feel like sometimes they could just crack.
Oh yeah. Absolutely. I'm very proud. I work with some vets who suffered from PTSD. And we talk in our meetings that crying should be the new sexy instead of muscles. Because when guys and girls, whether you're a muscle builder or you're a champion athlete or a bodybuilder, or if you're from a different country, we're all the same, and you have to be able to know who you are. You got to know your swing very well, and you got to know your emotions very well. And if you push everything inside and you don't know what you're feeling, that's a problem. If you're on the mound and you're gassed, you got to be able to say, okay, I'm tired right now. Or you got to know it. You got to know when you're angry and you're frustrated, and you have to be able to express it in order to fix it. Self-awareness leads to change. And so if you keep everything inside and think you're all tough, it doesn't usually win, because that causes a lot of depression, anxiety, and a lot of burnout. But I think that our culture, and like the machismo culture, the old school culture, is if you tell your coach I'm burnt out, or my arm hurts, you're weak, suck it up.
Yeah.
And that leads to more burnout and injuries as well.
I can certainly see that. And being able for a coach or a manager to be able to communicate effectively with their player and to give them some guidance, that's key. And one thing I'm thinking about now too is, I know the challenge sometimes with language. I think about 30% of MLB players come from other countries. If we look at Dominican Republic, they're probably about 10% of all MLB players. Boy, that should be interesting World Baseball Classic. But
Right. Yeah.
uh, I was glad to see, I know what in some cases, well, the Rays a couple of years ago, Wander Franco, young man coming in. You talk about commitments early on. They were there. And he probably had some challenges, but the Rays brought along Nelson Cruz. Here's a man who spoke the same language, a man who's lived the game for many years, and someone who could probably give perspective, somebody that Franco may have revered himself. And I thought, to me, I don't know that was the thinking behind the Rays, but I thought, what a great idea to bring somebody in like that, to, not necessarily to come in and tell Wander Franco what to do, but to be there for him, to lead by example.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I mean, to mentor him and to be there for him. And well, that's the whole idea, that the more teams that are more cohesive, and that's an issue. Like with women's sports, they can come around and talk and like do team building, but it's all, like almost like the guys, like, how do we create a brotherhood, of like play for each other? I think that like if a guy is struggling, yeah, I would probably I would say, listen, Nelson, like, hey, talk to him, go to dinner with him, include him, take him, make dinner, go hang out, be there for him, support him. That would make him feel, that would break him in like a glove a lot quicker. And the more he feels included and supported and cared for, the better he's going to play probably. So that's another piece, is feeling trust and empathy and kindness and playing for each other. When I interviewed Matt Adams on my podcast, they talked a lot about the Nationals, when they won the World Series, they were not good at the beginning. I mean, they were like struggling, and they all went into the dugout, into the clubhouse, and say, guys, like, let's have fun. Like, we know how to play baseball. Let's enjoy the game. And as they started enjoying the game and just playing game by game, one at bat at a time, yes, it's like, yes, we want to win the World Series, but that's like a magnet. But that could be pressure. We're not here just to win. We're here to win one game at a time. Yep. We're going to one at bat at a time, win one pitch at a time. And then you just pass it back, and then you just have fun. And if you stay in the present and you play for a bigger meaning of the gratitude and the enjoyment of the game, then all of a sudden the winning kind of takes care of itself. So but it was great that they had this come to meeting going, okay, guys, let's reflect what's not working and let's change it. That's evolution. Amen. But I think that we get a lot of old school organizations that are doing the same thing over and over again. And I'm not going to call out the Rangers, because the Rangers haven't won a whole lot. Or, the teams that haven't won, unless we can name it, that's a problem. That's not the players, and I don't care. Oh, yeah. Like, people can say it's the culture. It is the culture. It is the leadership, because these are great. These are Major League Baseball players. So to me, it's the leadership and the culture. And if you have a culture of relaxation and trust and fun, you will start to improve. And that's how I feel. That's why I know the mental game is everything.
Oh, you sold me. I mean, I believed it anyway, but I mean, I know watching the game, I love dugout shots, because to me, I'm seeing if there's some camaraderie out there, if there's somebody that's cutting up, if there's a positive energy happening there, because right. I know if that's going on, one, their mind is in the game. They're probably a healthier person.
Yes.
And they're probably more cohesive as a team. They're still right. You're still going to see moments where one of them will shout at the other, like, what the heck are you doing out there? But that's human nature. But all in all, when you see that kind of camaraderie, I've seen dugouts where they're all almost silent. Right. You'd think they were in the middle of a funeral procession or something.
Exactly. And I have quotes are really big for me. And I quoted this: fun is freedom. because when you're having fun, your instincts take over.
That sounds right to me.
So we have a long way to go, but these are the conversations that I'm glad, Mark, that you're bringing me on for, because it really is all about the mental game. It's all about fun. It's all about trust. It's all about belief. It's about being grateful. And I think about the greed and the money. I really think that's caused a little bit of a problem,
Yeah.
because it's putting a lot more pressure, I think, even on our athletes.
Well, athletes who started with fun of the game and then have to feel like they're charging for money is a whole other thing. Sometime on another show, I'd like to talk to you about that path of an athlete. I mean, whether it be somewhere from the Dominican Republic, an academy team there, to as they're coming through, like I said, the expectations, even from the Dominican Republic, the language barriers, all these impediments they could be impediments for a young player. So that I'd like to do on a future show with you, maybe.
Sure.
But right now, tell us a little bit more about what you were doing at the Texas Center.
Yeah, so God, I've been in the same office since 2007, and the majority in San Antonio, Texas, the majority of my work we don't have a lot of many professional teams here. Like we have the Spurs, but we have the Missions. I think some of the Spurs bought the Missions. I think there's double A. So I think the Brewers. I've done a little work with some of the players there. But typically athletes, a lot of college and high school baseball players, tennis players, pretty much all athletes come to see me. I always interview the parents. I ask the athletes to tell me about, and I like the fact that I'm a clinical sports psychologist, where there's a lot of like sports performance people that just come in and they just want to talk performance. And I think that's missing the boat too, because these people are, these are people. And so I want to know who they are. I want to know their career identity. I want to know what they enjoy other than their sport. I want to know why they're doing their sport. I want to talk to the parents. I want to talk about their communication. I want to talk about physical and mental health. For example, a really great example is you mentioned the yips. Well, I know a lot about the yips because there's a lot of circumstances. Mackie Sasser from the Mets, he struggled with getting the ball from the catcher to the pitcher. He was a catcher. Steve Sachs and Chuck Knobloch, both, I believe, were second basemen for the Yankees, had a hard time getting the ball from second base to first base. And some of the pitchers underhand it from pitcher to first. Because I do think that the thinking component slides in, right? And they start overthinking things.
Oh, yeah.
The fear of failure kicks in. And there's almost like more of an embarrassment factor that if you overthrow the pitcher versus a shortstop gunning it over the first baseman's head. Okay. So it becomes pressure. It can be injury, and that can lock that arm to be very tight. So one of the guys I work with, let me give you an example. The parent said that he has a little bit of the yips. And I don't like to use the word yips because I feel like it's a condition. And I think it's more of like permanent. So I don't really care for the word, but it's a word. So he came in, and I've been doing this for a very long time. I've played softball for many years until I was 38 competitively, and Little League baseball. I've had arm injuries. I've dislocated my shoulder. I've had shoulder pain. So he's also a quarterback, this guy. So he's a quarterback and a baseball pitcher. And he has tryouts coming up within a week. And he comes into my office, and as I'm interviewing, he's telling me that, he's really struggling getting to the ball to the target. And I asked him, I said, do you have any shoulder pain? Like, do you have any? And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, so how long have you been having it? For a while? So I said, and he's talking to me about it. And I said, I think you may have a slap tear in your rotator cuff. I said, but the only way to definitively know that is you need to get an MRI. And I said, I do not recommend you going to that baseball tryout in a few days, because if you go with an arm injury, you're going to show off your arm, you're going to gun it, and you can really make it worse. And I said, your junior year, you have time. You really want to think long-term about this, and you really should get yourself checked. And I brought the mom into the session, and I said, listen, my instincts and my gut instincts is that I think your son has an injury that needs to be looked at immediately. And I don't recommend him going to that tryout. And that's probably causing his psychological issues. It's a physical issue that he's now made it psychological. But I think that everybody told him to suck it up and he's desensitized himself through pain. He thinks that pain is normal. But long story short, he goes to the doctor I recommended. He has a slap tear, and within a week he's having surgery. And I said, don't come back to me until that shoulder is really healed, and then we'll talk more. And the mom thanked me because they're coming to a psychologist, and it's medical. So I think there's a lot of components that can impact the yips, or short arming it.
Well, and that's, I think it was an important part that you mentioned is from your own experience as an athlete and the things that you've experienced. It's somebody, yes, okay, I'm glad you're a positive imaging coach and you're doing those things, or you're doing something that, somebody comes in for, whatever, work with their mentality. But when you talk to a person, you're not looking at just turning a key. You're seeing relationships of what's going on with them. And to be able to define that relationship, or at least say, looks like there's something here that requires further analysis. There's probably not enough of that going on.
No, there's not enough going on.
Yeah.
It's complicated.
Well, Dr. J, I want to thank you. Are there any other things any messages or something you want to leave with our audience?
I think that we need to tell our audience that they should be doing more, whether it's reading, hitting books, or mentality of hitting or pitching, supporting our kids, not giving them all the answers. But we need to spend more time developing the mental game and not just the physical game. And it's okay. And I always tell people that going to a sports psychology consultant is just another coach. We're just coaches. And so I really want to push that agenda today is support your athletes, give them every resource they can, and have no regrets, especially with your kids.
Wow. Well, we've been speaking with Dr. Julie Wernick of Getting Ready with Dr. J. If you haven't checked out her podcast, please do so. I think it's very illuminating. She has some great guests on there and certainly some great topics. Julie, thanks again for joining us here today on Baseball Biz on Deck. And
I enjoyed it.
I look forward to talking with you again real soon.
All right. Thanks, Mark.
We've been speaking with Dr. J, that's Dr. Julie Wernick, today on Baseball Biz. Julie's a clinical sports psychologist. You can find Dr. J on her podcast, Getting Gritty with Dr. J, or on her website at www.gettinggritty.com. Thanks again for listening to Baseball Biz. And as always, remember, you can find us here. You can find us on podcast directories everywhere. Go ahead and leave us a review. We'd love to hear what you have to say. Or you can find me, Mark, on Twitter at @TheBaseballBiz. Thanks again for listening, and we look forward to seeing you again real soon. Special thanks to X-Take RUX for the music rocking forward.